Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron Channel. I'm Steve Shaw. In this video, we're going to ask the question, is natural muscle building potential a real thing or is it a joke? Before we get into this topic, if you have any questions or comments, drop them down below. The best topic ideas I turn into videos just like this. All right, this is a very heated topic. It's been a very heated topic of discussion for probably 2 decades now. I'm going to dive into some of the research at the end. I want you to leave your opinion. This is something I've spent many years studying. I was a part of Dr. Casey Butt's original forum, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I'm very familiar with his research, and I think it's a valuable contribution to the natural realm. So, what is natural muscle building potential? Is it a fairy tale? Is it just kind of a made up concept being tossed around? There's natural limits. Somebody says there's natural limits, but there's no science. Is it truly limiting? Is the concept of natural potential a limit, or is it a good goal? And finally, does any research exist? So we're going to dive into this. It's going to be a pretty long video, so hold tight. It's going to be packed with information. I'm not going to rush through things, so let's go. Now, before we dive into things, we need to discuss performance versus physiology because this is a big issue. If you look at powerlifting or strength standards for naturals over the last 10 to 15 years, they have exploded. Back when I was chasing a 2,000 pound raw total, and I never hit it. Let's be clear. I was chasing it. It was a goal of mine. But back then, I believe there was only like 80 or 82 lifters in the history of powerlifting that had ever hit a 2,000 pound raw total. This was, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, 8 years ago. I really can't remember, but I do remember the number. It was definitely less than 100. Now that number has exploded. There's a ton of lifters, natural and not natural, well over that 2,000 pound raw total. And if you look at natural strength standards, they have exploded over the last 10 years. So why is this? And is it the same for muscle building? Let's look at the difference between performance versus physiology. Strength is a function of performance. Performance numbers increase over time in a sport, usually because of an expanding data pool. You have a bigger history of lifters attempting things. So obviously you're going to have bigger and bigger numbers. You're going to have bigger and bigger standards over time. You have advances in technique, advances in training, etc. Strength is a function of performance. How big a natural can get is mostly a physiological trait. It's mostly limited by physiology, not performance. Yes, hard training helps you reach it, but from what we understand, hard training can't turn you into a superhuman. We know this basically on anything. Even if you wanted to fly, you can't train yourself to fly, right? If you wanted to train yourself to jump off 1,000-foot cliff and live, you can't turn yourself into a superhuman. So we have to understand the difference between advancing in strength, which is a performance trait, and assuming we can do the same thing with human physiology or muscle. All right, Dr. Casey Butt's study. This is where we're going to start the discussion. Is natural potential a fairy tale? Is it grounded in science? Dr. Casey Butt performed one of the most extensive, probably the most extensive study into natural muscle building potential there ever was. And it still is the gold standard, and it's rock solid information, in my opinion. If you believe it's accurate, that's another thing. But the way he performed this study, the information in this study, it's very rock solid. It's not just a random nonsense scientific study, but the time and energy and effort he put into this is substantial. Now, Dr. Casey Butt analyzed the numbers of over 300 natural champions. Let's stress this. He analyzed the numbers of 300 natural champions, not mid-card guys like me, right? But genetic elites from 1947 to 2010. Numerous factors analyzed included height, weight, body fat percentage, bone structure, wrist and ankle size, and more. So Dr. Casey Butt not only looked at height and weight and body fat percentage, but also bone structure, how big the bone structure was of the individual. And when we're talking bone structure, we're generally talking about shoulders and hips. Now, a formula was developed to help lifters establish natural potential. This was to help natural lifters in a world of steroid abuse understand what is reasonable. Understand back then, around 2005, 2010, you know it was chaos. There was a bunch of steroid abusers. There was like the Wild West. No one knew what was reasonable naturally. And this was the point of Dr. Casey Butt's study. We're going to look at all the natural champions, and we're going to try to determine what is reasonable naturally and what is likely unreasonable. Dr. Casey Butt didn't put this together to limit natural lifters. He put this together to educate natural lifters as to what their potential was. And if you think about it, if we're looking at the numbers of 300 genetic elites in the history of bodybuilding, these are guys that most likely none of us will ever get to that level, right? So it's a good top tier standard. It's a good gold standard for us to chase after. Now, from his research, this is the formula that Dr. Casey Butt came up with. Maximum lean body mass, that's LBM, that's everything in your body if you took away all the fat. We have to understand what lean body mass is, equals height to a factor of 1.5. And then we have wrist size and ankle size over a bunch of numbers multiplied by body fat percentage over 224 plus 1. This is the formula he created from his vast pool of data. H equals height in inches, A equals ankle circumference at the smallest point, W equals wrist circumference measured on the hand side of the styloid process, or that little bone in your wrist, and percent body fat percentage at which you want to predict your lean natural potential. So with the body fat percentage, you can plug in any body fat percentage, 12, 20, 25. That'll help you determine about where your lean body mass would be at that potential. Now, here are the formula limitations, the limitations of the research Dr. Casey Butt put together. It works best with reasonable body fat percentages and mostly normal bone structures. If you have a bigger bone structure, or your body fat percentage is super huge, it's probably going to skew the data, not by a dramatic amount, but by small percentage points. But still, it's something we need to be aware of. Now, naturally skinny, smaller frame lifters can generally reach about 95% of these projections. When you have men with larger hip and shoulder structures and smaller bone structures, they may be able to exceed these projections by 5%. This is important because many top tier bodybuilders have bigger structures. They look wider in the shoulders, which helps them get a nice V taper and actually smaller bone structures. So they look better aesthetically. So this only bolsters the formula and the projections. The top tier guys that Dr. Casey Butt studied are the genetically elite, the aesthetically elite, and likely they have wider shoulders in general, better, smaller bone structures, and they look better on stage. Now, should we just dismiss this research? Okay. Dr. Casey Butt put a lot of time and effort into studying this. I'm not sure how long it took him to put together this study, but 300 natural champions from 1947 to 2010. Should we just dismiss this research as something that's outdated? Well, two important facts that should be noted. Number one, no natural lifter, to my knowledge, and I've been studying this and analyzing the formulas and looking at this for about 15 years, no natural lifter, to my knowledge, has ever exceeded these standards by more than a statistically insignificant percentage. And I've been looking at this for 15 years. I've never seen any legit natural influencer, bodybuilder, whatever, surpass these projections by more than a trivial insignificant percentage. Number two, when these formulas are used to predict lean body mass for current and past champions, it is incredibly accurate over and over and over again. We're going to get into this. You can use this formula to predict the weight, stage weight, and lean body mass of past and current champions and current YouTube celebrities, right, or current fitness influencers. You can use this information to predict their lean body mass at any given body fat percentage, and it's incredibly accurate over and over again. Now, before we move forward, we have to discuss potential, not limitation. Dr. Casey Butt put this together to establish a potential, to establish quality standards for natural lifters, and not to be a limitation. His work should not be viewed so much as a limitation, but rather a high standard. Remember, we have 300 natural champions here. Only the cream of the crop in the natural bodybuilding realm have managed to come close to these upper genetic ceilings. Yet despite this, we have a tendency to label this as limiting, right? As something that limits us. Now, is the formula accurate? This is a chart I put together a long time ago, probably about 13, maybe 12 years ago for another website. And it looks at the predicted weight using Dr. Casey Butt's formula versus the actual weight of some current, and at that time current, and past champions. You have Clarence Ross, John Verbotnik, George Efferman, Reg Park, John Grymick, Jack Dillinger, Steve Reeves, and a couple current natural champions, world champions. You have their predicted weight using Dr. Casey Butt's formula, which is in the second column, and their actual weight. Now, if you look at guys like Reg Park, his predicted weight was 214. His actual weight was 214 at about 8% body fat. John Grymick predicted 208, actual weight 208. Steve Reeves predicted weight using Casey Butt's formula, actual weight 214. The champions 170, 170, 168, and 168. So what do we have here? We have the data, the formula that was created by Dr. Casey Butt based on these 300 champions, these 300 natural champions. It was turned into a formula. Using that formula, we were able to predict with a stunning degree of accuracy the predicted weight of many of these past champions, past and current champions. So we have established that Dr. Casey Butt's formula is incredibly, incredibly accurate. So let's backtrack a little bit before we move on and get into more information on this topic. I want to discuss how do PEDs work? How do steroids and human growth hormone work? Well, this is a stupid, simple, dumbed down list of bullet points, but we're going to dive into them. All right, number one, steroids increase muscle protein synthesis rates. They not only increase them, but they keep them elevated. We all know that muscle protein synthesis tends to be elevated after a workout for 48 hours and then tends to decrease back down to normal levels, right? That's for a natural. With a steroid user, they're going to elevate and they're going to be sustained. That's a very important point. Steroids induce a greater average positive nitrogen balance. Human growth hormone allows for the creation of new muscle cells. So not only do you have existing muscle cells which are being bolstered from steroids, but human growth hormone can increase the number of muscle cells, thus increasing the overall mass. Now, steroids work to block the impact of cortisol on muscle tissue. This is another benefit of PED use. Steroids also improve creatine phosphate synthesis, which can be beneficial when attempting to reopen sensitized muscle tissue receptors. And finally, steroids improve the ratio of testosterone to myostatin, allowing for greater potential muscle size. All right, the result of all this, you get supernatural testosterone levels, which lead to elevated muscle protein synthesis levels. HGH can create new muscle cells. Natural testosterone levels have more finite muscle protein synthesis levels and muscle growth potential for all the reasons we just noted. Steroid users sustain higher muscle protein synthesis levels. So these are some of the important, not a complete list, but some of the important differences between natural physiology and PED use. Now, the result part two. Anabolic steroids also work to block some of the impact of cortisol on muscle tissues, which works to slow the rate at which existing muscle tissue is broken down. Also, steroids work to increase creatine phosphate synthesis. This allows lifters to train longer and harder. Now, this benefit in and of itself does not directly cause muscle growth, but it can work to stimulate or repair damaged muscle tissue receptors, thus allowing for improved gains. Now we're going to dive into some current Natty Pros. This list was current, 10, 12 years ago. So some of these names might be a little bit dated for you, but at the time, these were champions. These were current natural champions and natural pros. Now we have guys like Philip Ricardo Jr., Ty Din. I actually went to film Ty Din in Minnesota way back when. We have Sean Clarita, who is now a competitor on the Mr. Olympia stage. Back then, he was a 100% natural lifter. Roger Waters, Sean Sullivan, who competed over 70 times. Francisco Montielgre, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, and Joe Roblo, who I filmed as well, which was the natural Mr. North Carolina. Now we have their height and their weight and their lean body mass and their projected lean body mass max. Philip Ricardo Jr. competed at 5'9", 180 in the Yorton Cup. That's one of the elite natural bodybuilding shows. His lean body mass was around 169. His projected max was around 175. So even on stage at an elite natural bodybuilding competition, Philip Ricardo Jr. was a little bit below his natural projected potential. Now, Sean Clarita, back then, he was competing at 5'2", 135, at about a lean body mass of 127, and his projected lean body mass potential was 140. You have guys like Francisco, who was competing at 5'10", a weight of 178. His lean body mass was around 167, and his projected lean body mass was 180. Now, these guys are competitors, and they're super lean and super ripped, and they're in the worst possible state, super low on the body fat percentage. So, of course, their lean body mass and projected lean body mass are going to look a little bit low. Now, I'm going to move on to the Shaw Simple Formula. This is a formula I created that basically takes your height and weight. It dumbs down Dr. Casey Butt's formula a little bit just for the purpose of having a quick reference guide. I created a streamlined formula based on height and weight alone. It doesn't take into account bone size, ankle and wrist circumference, etc. With that said, it's still highly accurate for you and for me if we want to just get a general range what our natural potential is, not natural limitations. Now, in the left column, you can see your height, and then the column right to the next of it, you can see your lean body mass potential. Lean body mass, again, is your body weight if it had no fat. Now, each column to the right of that shows a body fat percentage, 10, 15, 20, and 25%. Look at your height and then look at your body fat percentage, and this would show you about what your weight would be if you were maxed out lean body mass potential at that body fat percentage. So I am 5'10". My lean body mass potential is around 178 to 182. I know this from experience, so I took an average here of around 180. I know this because I've studied this. I've studied my lean body mass potential. I've been around 178, 179-ish for about 15 years. It really hasn't changed. At 10%, my body weight would be around 200. At 15%, 212. At 20%, 225, etc. So if you look at your favorite natural bodybuilder, or if you look at your favorite fitness influencer or YouTube celebrity, and you want to get an idea of where they are relative to their lean body mass potential, you just need to know their height. You need to know their approximate body fat percentage. So let's say you had a 5'10" lifter that was just looking jacked, right? Just looking jacked, and he was about 210 pounds. Let's say he looked about 12% body fat. That would be That would be about right. That would fall in line with lean body mass potential standards. If you had a 5'10 lifter that was like 10% body fat and saying he was 230 pounds, something would be sketchy, right? Either he would be enhanced or he'd be lying about his height or weight. So this chart is a good quick reference guide. Look at your height. The LBM is your natural potential, give or take a pound or two, because this is a quick reference guide. And if you project out at 10, 15, 20, and 25% body fat, you can see what you would weigh at about your natural potential. Now, max muscle in pounds. How much muscle can you gain naturally over the course of a lifting career? Now, most naturals that train hard and start at a normalized weight, and we need to stress this, you are not starting underweight, have the potential to gain about 30 to 35 pounds of muscle over the course of their lives. This is a generalization. It can vary based on your bone size. It can vary based on your height. It can vary based on a lot of different factors, but this is a good general rule. If you're not starting as a 122 pound or 132 pound underweight skinny guy, if you're starting more normalized body weight, you can gain about 30 to 35 pounds of muscle over the course of your life. Now, you don't lose potential if you start slow. Let's say your first 5 to 8 years in the gym, you just suck. You're not doing much at all. You're not gaining much mass at all. Maybe you gain 5 to 10 pounds in 5 to 8 years and you just suck. You don't lose your potential. Basically, and this is a general rule, but a very helpful rule, and a rule based on Dr. Casey Butt's research. During a given training year, if everything is perfect, you have about the potential to gain half of your remaining mass. What does this mean? Let's say you have the potential to gain about 32 pounds of muscle naturally, and you only gain like 4 pounds, right? This is your natural potential. You have the potential to gain 32 pounds of mass, and you only gained about 4 pounds. You're like, did I lose all my muscle mass? No. From here, you have the potential, if everything is perfect, to gain about half of that. And the year after that, half of that. And the year after that, half of that. Most guys don't work like that. They start slow and they start slow and they start slow. And like after 5 or 6 years, they're about right here and they're very frustrated with their results. Are all gains lost? No. During the next year, you have the potential to gain about half of your remaining mass. Now, optimal gains. What are optimal gains? If you started straight out of the gate as a newbie with everything perfect, your sleep was perfect, your nutrition was perfect, your training was perfect, you were just blessed from the gods, blessed from Crom, with everything perfect straight out of the gate. In a perfect world, this would be about as much as you could gain your first year, about 14 to 16 pounds of mass. A little bit of variance here, but that's about perfect. That's very reasonable. And if everything was perfect after that point, the second year would be 7 to 8 pounds, the third year 3 to 4, the fourth year 1 to 2, and then after that you're scraping for pounds and ounces. This is really close to what I experienced. I was super lucky right out of the gate. I was able to just crush nutrition. I was able to sleep as much as I wanted to. And luckily enough, I was nailing my nutrition. I experienced rapid progression, rapid strength gains, and I just had everything in place. Now, after my first 3 years of lifting, I was probably about 80 to 85% of the way to where I am now. And since year 5, I've really been scraping for pounds and ounces. I haven't gained much mass at all. Some people laugh at me when I say that and say, ha, 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 you don't know how to train. And maybe that's true. Maybe I'm a complete idiot. But despite that, the last 33 years, I think I've accomplished a lot. And I think I have a reasonably decent physique for being a fat-ass power lifter that almost ate himself to death. Now, what are more realistic gains? Optimal gains are kind of a fairy tale. Let's face it, most of us aren't optimal out of the gate. So even under good circumstances, these are more realistic targets, even if you had things pretty solidly in place right out of the gate. Year 1, 8 to 10, year 2, 6 to 8, year 3, 5 to 6, year 4, 3 to 4. And then after that, you're doing your thing, about half a remaining potential. That's more likely straight out of the gate. Beyond that, most guys are like 2 to 3, 2 to 3, 2 to 3. And then maybe if they're lucky, they figure out 4, 5, 6 years into training what they're doing wrong, and they really have a good spike. Now, let's talk about the idea that there are no limits. Again, we want to stress that this research was put together to establish natural potential, to help naturals understand, is this guy natural? What is my potential natural? Because there was so much crap in the steroid world that naturals really had no idea what to expect. How big can I get naturally? So this research and this information, the heart of it was put together to help you guys, understand what your potential was, how big you could get naturally. Now, with that said, when we look at 300 natural champions, again, we're looking at the cream of the crop. So that shows you the best possible standard you could ever reach. I mean, it's just a glorious standard. Who wouldn't want to be among the best of the best natural champions? Despite this, we have a tendency in modern social media to call this a limit. Okay, we call this research and this concept sometimes limits. To those that consider this research to be limiting, they simply have to prove it wrong. I'm not being sarcastic or cynical here. If someone believes this research or this concept is bunk or stupid or idiotic, they simply have to prove it wrong. They have to do it by showing their body fat percentage, by showing their height, by showing their weight. They can't fudge us around or jerk us around. They simply have to be legit natty and show us that it's wrong by more than a trivial amount. Now, in my 15 years of studying natural potential, I've never seen any true natural exceed these projections by anything more than a trivial amount. It's not like I had a horse in the race. I studied this because I'd been in lifting over 20 years, and I grew up in the steroid world, and I simply wanted to know where I was and was there more left? Could I be like Tom Platz? Could I be like Arnold? Or, did I just have a few pounds naturally to gain? This was a legit question. So I approached this research from a place of neutrality. I simply just wanted to know, because it was a belief at the time, if you just train hard enough, if you just push hard enough, you can get as big as anybody if you're just patient enough. That's what we believed. So to recap, in my 15 years of studying natural potential, I've never seen anybody when the numbers were legit and reasonably accurate, meaning someone didn't say, hey, I'm at 7% body fat and they were really at 20, right? I've never seen anybody exceed these numbers by more than a trivial amount. Now, while I truly understand the pushback against potential discussions, I truly understand there's a pushback against discussions about natural potential and not limitations, right? We know the following. Unlike strength, which is a performance-based trait or a performance-based number, unlike strength standards, the top competitive natural bodybuilders have been, and this is an important point, top natural bodybuilders have been around the same relative lean body mass numbers for 70 to 80 years. There has been no advancement in size. We know this when we actually look at the data and don't just make a reactionary, there are no limits proclamation. Over the last 70 to 80 years, if you look at natural bodybuilding champions now, if you look at top fitness influencers now, if you look at top natties now, their lean body mass is no different than champions from 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. There's been no advancement, not even a slight advancement. It's been about the same. Not about the same. It's been nearly exactly the same. All right, it is very common for lifters riding a wave of progress, lifters that are really going strong, either as beginners or maybe they're an intermediate lifter and they really hit their stride. It's common for these lifters to assume that their current progress is sustainable. They assume, because they're riding such a big wave of progress, that it's going to be sustainable and they will smash through 80 years of natural muscle building data. Guys get kind of high. They're on a high and they're just crushing things. And they're like, man, I'm going to break through natural limits. Things are just rocking. This is a natural response when lifters are just crushing things. the natural limit. I'm riding high. I'm King Kong. I'm going to destroy these things. But we have not seen that occur yet. We've not seen any lifter, no matter where they are at, no matter what stage of lifting they are making their progress at, break through the research that Dr. Casey Butt has established. This is not an opinion. This is basically simple facts. We've not seen anybody do it. Again, if someone does it, show us, then we will adjust the data, but we have not seen it yet. Now, sadly, Dr. Casey Butt's website is gone. His website and form are gone. His extensive PDF book on his research is all but lost. A few of you might have it. A few of you might be familiar with it. And if you have it, I'd love a copy. But his website is gone. We can no longer buy this research. And because of this, in the coming years, it's likely we will have a pushback against this information because we can't find it. The pushback will likely grow simply because we no longer have easy access to the original information. As the years pass, there will be a detachment. The concept of natural potential will seem like a foreign concept because we are so far detached from these types of studies or this study that we start to believe it's a fairy tale or something that some evil lifter on YouTube created to limit us. Now, I'm going to end with some quotes from Dr. Casey Butt. I interviewed him for Muscle and Strength, and you can find these interviews over on Muscle and Strength. You simply have to research Dr. Casey Butt and Steve Shaw or Dr. Casey Butt and Muscle and Strength. So here are a few quotes to end this long video. Dr. Casey says, here's where it gets interesting. With the form of the equation determined, data from 1947 to 2009, it's an ongoing process, world, national, and regional drug-free bodybuilding competitors show a strong correlation between height, wrist, and ankle girths and maximum peak lean body mass. Scaled for height and bone structure size, the largest drug-free bodybuilders of the past 60-plus years all top out at essentially the same level. In other words, Reg Park, who was one of the largest elite bodybuilders of the 1950s, carried roughly the same degree of development as a more modern drug-tested champion such as Dave Gooden or Jim Cordova, when scaled accordingly. Even Steve Reeves, who was not known for great muscular size, scales to the same level when his height and bone structure are taken into account. So when we talk scaling, we're talking about bone structure, factoring ankle size, wrist size, and bone structure into the equation. That's not saying that modern bodybuilders don't look more muscular than those of earlier eras. They do because of their extremely low contest body fat levels and aesthetics. But in terms of lean body mass with body fat percentage factored in, they haven't gained any size. They haven't gotten any bigger. For many people, despite this clear, undeniable correlations, the idea of limitations presents a mental stumbling block. And they'll throw up all sorts of arguments, such as bodybuilders aren't necessarily those with the highest muscular potentials. 2, my uncle is an alcoholic and doesn't train, and he's already as big as those equations predict. We hear this a lot when you talk natural bodybuilding potential. The rebuttals are fairly simple. The equations will be slanted in the direction of championship physiques because this is what they were based on. Because of that, the equations assume a relatively small waist and hip structure. This can cause less aesthetically gifted individuals to reach the same weight predictions without corresponding levels of muscular development because of extra weight they carry due to their larger waist and hips. However, we're talking on the order of a few pounds here, nothing as silly as I weigh 20 pounds more than the predictions. What must be kept in mind is that these equations were formulated on some of the history's biggest and greatest bodybuilders. They essentially scale your structure to that level of development. Most people, in fact, will not be able to reach that level because they don't have the naturally high testosterone levels, full muscle bellies, robust joint structures, etc., to allow the development and support of that amount of muscle mass. Not everyone can be a champion bodybuilder. For that reason, the ebook, Dr. Casey Butt's ebook, contains a range of equations based on populations of varying genetic potentials, not just champions. And again, this research is mostly lost. To claim to exceed the elite-based equations is really quite a claim indeed. If people do honestly believe they're at that level, then they should objectively assess their body fat percentages. If they still think so, then they should look in the mirror. A world-class physique, at least with regards to muscle size, not necessarily aesthetics, will look pretty impressive. I'm paraphrasing, but he's saying the guys that believe they're as big as Reg Park, sometimes you just kind of honestly need to look in the mirror and say, you're a little bit fatter body fat percentage-wise, or do you really look that muscular? All right, a final word. I want you guys to share your thoughts. As a community, we must balance reason with emotion. You know, this emotion that we get when we're training hard, that I'm going to smash through things and I'm going to break through potential. We have to balance reason. Do you reasonably think, if you believe you're bigger than these natural potential standards, that you're bigger than Reg Park? Do you really believe you're bigger than John Grymick? Do you really look in the mirror and see John Grymick or Reg Park? Even the current best naturals in both bodybuilding and in the influencer crowd have not surpassed these numbers. I do the math in my head. I'm not going to be confrontational, but when I look at the numbers of YouTube influencers, fitness influencers, legit naturals, or even natural bodybuilding champions, when you do a quick calculation, you realize that they haven't exceeded these numbers, at least by my current calculations and available information on body fat, height, and weight. So guys, hope this video has been of some help. If you have any questions or comments, drop them down below. If you made it this far in this video and have yet to subscribe to my channel, please do. I'd appreciate the support. So guys, as always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.